everyone. So I have this book here that I bought a few years back. This is a recipe book inspired by the movie and the books of Harry Potter. It says the unofficial Harry Potter cookbook. From Cauldron Cakes to Knickerbocker Glory, more than 150 magical recipes for wizards and non-wizards alike. I thought this was very interesting, so I bought it. So it's basically a recipe cookbook that has a lot of recipes from the books and the movies. It has sweet and savory dishes in here. I actually like it. There's some interesting, weird recipes and some really delicious ones. So I'll be reading the so like for example, it looks like this. There are no pictures, unfortunately. But what's really cool is that on the side here, there's a little box that has interesting facts about that specific recipe. And they're very interesting, so I'll be reading those. Okay, so let's get started. Let me see. There's tons and tons of recipes here, but let's start with this one that says scrumptious cake. So I folded it so I can read it because it was interesting. So this is a recipe for cherry bakewell cake. And it says a lot of delicious foods were created by accident. And this might be one of them. According to legend, the cook of the White Horse Inn in Bakewell, a town in Derbyshire, I hope I'm saying it right. This is a lot of British recipes. In the center of England, was asked by the landlady to make a strawberry tart. The cook forgot to mix the jam into the almond custard and tried to cover it by spreading the jam on the tart shell, creating a whole new dessert. This popular cake imitates the flavors of the famous Bakewell tart. And basically, it's an almond cake, butter frosting. That's interesting. More facts about cakes and desserts here. Custard is very, very British. In the mid-1800s, a British chemist whose wife was allergic to eggs invented a custard thickened with cornstarch instead of eggs, which he sold as a powder, and since then, custard sauce appears with just about every dessert. True cooks prefer to make rich egg custard rather than using the instant powder. That's easier to make but doesn't taste as good. Also, the British often refer to layered cake as sandwich cakes, like the Victoria sponge. The layers are dense, rich, rather than light and fluffy. This is a recipe for custard sandwich, sponge cake. So let me continue finding interesting ones. Let's see anything interesting here. chocolate raspberry ice cream cones with chopped nuts. A good reason to be glad you live in modern times is ice cream. True ice cream has been around since the 1600s, but there are two big buts. One, ice cream was a treat only for the rich, and two, the ice cream today is much better quality. This one's really interesting. I wish I had photos, but it doesn't, unfortunately. Paddington burgers. There's a little bit interesting. There's a little like introduction of the recipe inspired by the movie. It says Harry eats hamburgers with Hagrid at Paddington Station while trying to sort out everything that's been happening lately. He's just been told by a half giant that he's a wizard. He's been whisked off to Diagon Alley by said giant to buy really strange school supplies. So the Paddington burgers. Historians may not agree on who invented the hamburger, but one thing's for sure. It's named for the city of Hamburg in Germany, so it really has nothing to do with the ham. As all the carnivores among us know, these patties typically are made from ground beef. Strawberry and butter ice cream cones. And how many recipes? Lots of people were involved in the discovery of peanut butter, including the famous Kellogg brothers, but George Washington Carver, an American, invented so many uses for peanut butter that he is known fairly or not as the inventor of peanut butter. Very interesting. Crumpets. What's more stereotypically British than tea with crumpets? Crumpets hail from as far back as the 1300s, though you can imagine they were nothing like the crumpets of today, with their holy tops filled with melting butter. That sounds really good, actually. I'd eat that right now. Chocolate pudding. In England, chocolate pudding can be either a steamed or baked pudding. Similar to chocolate cake or soft milk pudding, thickened with cornstarch, as in the United States. Puddings go all the way back to the Romans. The milk pudding we know of today, the only kind in this country, wasn't invented until the 1800s, since chocolate pudding can mean either kind. A recipe for each is included. Rich, sweet chocolate milk pudding. How to make a proper cuppa. Tea appears many times in the Harry Potter books, a testament to his importance in British life. A very significant tea in Harry's first one with Hagrid is the first of many and the beginning of a strong friendship. The invitation to come over and have a cuppa comes from have a cup of tea. The way to prepare a proper cuppa is almost a ritual. This most British of all drinks arrived in the 1600s from China and quickly replaced ale as the national drink. Tradition credits the Duchess of Bedford with starting the tradition of afternoon tea. She got very hungry waiting for her noon dinner to her 9 o'clock supper. So at around 4 in the afternoon, she would sneak some food and tea. Later on, she came out in the open and invited some ladies for tea and sweet delicacies and gossip. This caught on quickly among the higher class, who began to have tea with scones and jam, or with pastries and delicate sandwiches such as the famous cucumber sandwiches. I wish I should start making that my ritual as well, because yeah, sometimes I get super hungry before dinner, so I will sneak in a little tea and pastry. Or cucumber sandwiches. I've never had that actually. I wonder if it tastes good. Pumpkin juice. This is interesting. It's unsurprising that witches or wizards in this case would drink pumpkin juice during the fall harvest. The Celts used to carve vegetable lanterns out of turnips and rutabagas to scare away evil spirits. Later, Americans started using pumpkins in the same tradition. The pumpkin lanterns eventually became associated with Halloween, perhaps because of its connection with witches and demons and vampires and such alike. Four classically British pies. Number one is chicken and mushroom pies. That sounds really good actually. Meat and potato pies. Apple crumble pies. Banoffee pies. Medieval pies were filled with all sorts of food thrown together, like Magpie's collection, hence the name pie. Today we try to stick to a theme, so we have chicken and mushroom pie, and not chicken and mushroom and apples and whipped cream and oats and raisins, cinnamon and black pepper pie. Banoffee pie. Who invented Banoffee pie? I hope I'm saying it right. Banoffee pie. Nobody really knows. The Hungry Monk Cafe in Jevington takes credit for this banana toffee coffee pie created in the 1970s. But as it was never patented, we'll never know for sure. This recipe contains one of the coolest discoveries out there. If you boil a can of condensed milk for a few hours, it turns into a lovely caramelly goo. That sounds delicious. I've never had that before. Cocoa beans were so precious to the ancient Aztecs that they used them as money. The Spanish explorers brought the beans back to Spain in the 1500s, and from there it was only a matter of time for chocolate to catch on in the rest of Europe, and for the final product to be perfected. We have the Dutch to thank for figuring out how to make chocolate and cocoa powder as we know it, and the Swiss for thinking of adding milk. Yes, thank you, Swiss, because adding milk to chocolate is obviously the best. This is a recipe for a chocolate cake. A fruitcake. Once upon a time, in the faraway city of Dundee in Scotland, a factory produced marmalade, but it did not produce marmalade the whole year, so the rest of the year, the manufacturers came up with the idea to make a fruitcake with orange peel, also adding the almonds brought by the Spanish traders. Thus was born the Dundee cake, the fruitcake. This is so cool. See, this is why I want to read the side notes here, because they contain interesting historical facts. Sugar biscuits. Biscuit is the English word for cookie. Biscuits are an old food, and the Romans, of course, made dry biscuits, which they fried and ate with honey and pepper. Once the Middle Ages were passed, cooks learned to mix sugar with eggs and to cream butter with sugar, so we have them to thank for the many varieties of biscuits that abound today. French onion soup. For at least 2,000 years, maybe more, onion soup has been a staple for the poor. But French onion soup is a staple for the not-so-poor, with its rich beef broth, croutons, and melted cheese. Homemade fudge. Gray fudge should have slightly grainy but also smooth and creamy texture. It may take some practice to get right, although we Americans associate fudge with the chocolate variety. In England, it often means non-chocolate fudge, also called opera fudge, and it tastes absolutely amazing. Irish soda bread. Who doesn't like a soda bread? The Irish weren't very much into yeast breads. Inadequate cooking utensils were the culprit, so they must have been very happy when baking soda arrived on the scene. They could quickly and easily make bread with it, and that's what they've been doing since the late 1800s. This is the bread to serve with soups and stews, and it makes an awesome toast. I love soda bread. Any nut brittle. Nut brittle is one of the most delicious candies ever, which is true, in my opinion. And it's far too easy to crunch up a whole pound before you know it. It's been made for centuries, and with good reason. It's easy to make, you just need to watch the temperature carefully. How should you make this recipe? It's sugar, syrup, water, salt, butter, chopped nuts, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and baking soda. I think I can make that. I could definitely make that. Nutty chocolate covered toffee. A British American dictionary is useful if you need to know, for instance, that nappy doesn't mean napkin or a short nap, but diaper. That's interesting. Less useful is the fact that toffee is British for taffy, because in America these two confections are very different. Toffee is made with lots of butter and can be either hard or soft, while taffy is very chewy and is likely to pull your teeth out. Toffee is very easy to mess up. You need to watch the temperature carefully and constantly to prevent scorching. Do not despair if you ruin your first few batches. It's worth it to learn how to make this delicious candy. Mince pies. Mince pies are very Christmassy. If you eat a mince pie every day of the 12 days of Christmas, preferably in a different house each time, you will have a happy year. According to an old Yorkshire superstition, minced meat used to contain minced beef, hence the name, mixed with apples, dried fruit, suet, sugar, spices, and brandy. About 200 years ago, beef gradually began to be left out. Thank goodness. This recipe calls for butter rather than suet, and the latter is not readily available to the American consumer. Suet means like, I think it's like fat, the animal fat. Or I may be wrong, I forgot already. Kind of like lard, I'm assuming. Okay. Rhubarb crumble with custard sauce. That sounds absolutely delicious. I've never had rhubarb, but I am so want to have and try it. In the 1500s, you might have been offered stewed rhubarb when it was time to take your medicine, but that didn't work. It didn't get rid of bubonic plague. 3 centuries later, rhubarb finally found its way into pies. It did take kind of a long time, but it's a good thing they figured it out. If you try this recipe, you will understand why Harry had 3 helpings. Custard. I love custard. Anything with custard for me is the best. I'm content. Oh, I remember I made this recipe a while ago. Molly's meatballs with onion sauce. It was delicious, and it was very simple to make. Basically, you get the meatballs and you just follow the meatball instruction, but the onion sauce is vegetable oil, chopped onion, all-purpose flour, and chicken broth. That's it. And you thicken it up, and it's delicious. You pour it on top of the meatballs. Brussels sprouts with chestnuts. The Romans, no surprise there, brought the chestnut tree to Britain. Chestnuts. Over the years, and in many countries, chestnuts were ground up and mixed with flour, but these days we eat them roasted. They're also popular with Brussels sprouts at Christmas time. Really? Brussels sprouts and chestnuts. Okay. Herbie roast chicken with onion, garlic, mashed potatoes. Trying to find something interesting. Fried tomatoes. Did you know that until the mid-1700s, the British thought tomatoes were poisonous? They weren't far off the mark, though. Tomatoes are indeed related to the deadly nightshade, and the stems and leaves of the tomato plant do contain toxins. So when the tomato came to England in the late 1500s, it was cultivated as an unusual plant to look at. Thank goodness someone figured out that we can eat them, and they began to appear in cookbooks in the 1700s. Oh wow, I didn't know that. English farmhouse scrambled eggs and bacon. Who doesn't enjoy eggs with bacon on a weekend morning when there's actually time to make it and eat it? Feel like you're at home with Harry with his centuries-old breakfast classic. Thrown in fried tomatoes with toast and a bowl of porridge to pretend you're eating the traditional English breakfast. which contains too much food for normal people to eat even occasionally. Cinnamon pull-apart breakfast rolls. Cinnamon rolls or buns are a classic breakfast treat. Most people don't know this, but the cinnamon you buy is more likely powdered cassia bark, which tastes like cinnamon and is more plentiful and therefore cheaper. Real cinnamon is said to be superior, but who would know? So, we don't have real cinnamon here? Okay. Black pudding. Black pudding, also called blood sausage, is made from blood mixed with animal fat such as suet and as well as oats, onion, salt, and seasoning. The mixture is stuffed into casings and boiled in water. You can make your own because you can't legally purchase animal blood in the United States, but a recipe for black pudding follows. Since you are more likely to buy a pre-made pudding, be sure to slice the sausage thickly and reheat it gently as it's crumbly. This is an acquired taste. Some would eat, some would not. I personally would eat it. I think I've had it before also. Okay, let's get into ice cream. Classic and unique ice cream flavors. Okay. The Europeans used vanilla to flavor chocolate and tobacco at first, but as everyone knows that it's used today to flavor lots of other things. The most basic ice cream is vanilla, and it can be used as a base for other flavors. See the note for great variations, or use your imagination and come up with your own flavors. People often think of tea ice cream as using green tea and hailing from Asia, but the truth is that the traditional British cookbooks with an ice cream section invariably include a tea flavor. Tea ice cream. It's a recipe for tea ice cream. Whole milk, black tea, pure instant tea, unsweetened, heavy cream, sugar, and large egg yolks. Jam donuts. Do oily cakes sound appetizing? Well, that's what the Dutch settlers call them. Oily korken, when they introduced these little fried cakes in America. In England, when most people celebrate a pancake day, have a pancake day? The residents of the town of Baldock, about 30 miles north of London, celebrate their own version called Donut Day. In England, the most popular type of donut has no hole and is filled with jam. That's one of my favorites, with no hole. Rice pudding. Rice pudding has traveled around, beginning as a dessert for the very rich in medieval times and ended up as a plain Jane of desserts today. Rice pudding is good, but really isn't anything to make a fuss about. It's a nice ending to an ordinary weeknight dinner, but is not recommended as a dessert for a formal affair. Why not? I think it's delicious. chocolate eclairs. Eclair comes from the French word for lightning, but how it's related to this yummy dessert is anybody's guess. Perhaps it's because it disappears as quickly as lightning. Creamy, dreamy chocolate gâteau. Gâteau is the French word for cake, but there's a difference. Most Britons do know this, but in England, gâteau refers to a cake in which the filling is the main point, and the cake is just a structure to support it. The cake layers would be some sort of unremarkable sponge cake. To make an especially decadent gâteau, this recipe uses rich chocolate layers plus a rich filling, so you get the best of both worlds. Custard Tart, this is my favorite. The most important use for custard pies and tarts in the early 1900s was for throwing into people's faces in silent movies. This was considered for some reason extremely funny. Custard is very, very, very delicious, and the medievals liked it so much that they mixed anything and everything into it, from fruit breadcrumbs to ground meat and sage. For our purposes, however, a plain custard will suffice. Thank you very much. Oh, so delicious. Custard is one of my favorite desserts. If you've been wondering what in the world custard creams are, the mystery has been solved. They are nothing more than sandwich cookies, typically flavored with custard powder, which is similar to vanilla pudding mix. Custard cream. White chocolate is not really chocolate. It's made of milk, solids, sugar, and flavorings, but it does contain cocoa butter, the fat pressed out of the chocolate mass during processing, which allows it to use the name chocolate. A recipe for white chocolate truffles. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.